Hello everybody, I hope you had a great day yesterday. If there's any questions about solving using the quadratic formula from yesterday, determining how many solutions there are, how many x-intercepts there are, please make sure you're writing that down on that Google Doc. If there's any other questions, please feel free to email me. We can set up a Google Meet at any time. Alright, so today we're going to move on to the last part of 9.5, which is deciding what method you should use to solve a quadratic equation. So we've learned all of the methods at this point. There's factoring, which we learned in 7.5 to 7.8, so it seems like forever ago. There's graphing, which we did in 9.2. Using square roots, which we did in 9.3. Completing the square, which we did in 9.4. And quadratic formula, which is in 9.5. So deciding what method to use, it really depends on what kind of problem you're being given. So if you're going to factor, the best time to factor is if you have a quadratic equation that's easily factorable. It's kind of self-explanatory there. If you look at it and the a value is 1 and you can clearly see what two numbers multiply to c and add to b, well, then factor it and you'll be all set. So that's when factoring is easiest. Graphing, to be honest, I don't really think there's a time where I would choose graphing. It's kind of like with systems of equations, if you remember. There is graphing substitution elimination, and graphing is not always the best choice, so I probably wouldn't usually choose graphing. It says here that a big disadvantage, it might not give exact solutions. If it's a decimal or a fraction, you're going to have to do one of the other ones anyway, so you can't always solve by graphing. Using square roots, this is the easiest if you have like just one thing squared equals a number. That's when square roots is the best. So if that's the situation, like x squared equals 9, well, great, solve using square roots. Completing the square is best when the a value is 1 and the b value is even, they say. So that way it kind of avoids fractions. So when the a value is 1 and it's not easily factorable, then completing the square is a good choice. And then the quadratic formula, this is the best choice when you just can't think of anything else. So if you look at it and you said, I am not sure what the best method would be, well, a quadratic formula will work just fine because it works for any of them. So when in doubt, just use the quadratic formula to solve. So let's look at some problems where they ask us to choose what the best method would be. So if you look at A here, what would be our method of choice? So take a second and look at A. Decide what would you choose to do to solve this based off of that table on the previous page. Well, if you said solve by completing the square, that according to the card would be the best method to use because our a value is 1 and our b value is even, and c value is on the other side, so using completing the square would be fine. Now, it's not the only method you have to do. There's other things you could do. You could subtract 1, see if you could factor, and anything like that. But the way it's set up, completing the square would be the easiest. So I would take half of b, which is -5, and then square it, which is positive 25, and I'd add that to both sides. And then we factor right here, so we get x minus 5 squared equals 26. So from here, if I take the square root of both sides, remember that it becomes the positive and negative square root of 26. So it would be x minus 5 equals, and the square root of 26 is about 5.1, so positive 5.1, and x minus 5 equals negative 5.1. We just isolate y on both sides here until we get x equals 10.1 and x equals negative 0.1. All right, and those are your two answers. So the reason that we chose to solve by completing the square is because our a value was 1 and our b value was even. So now let's take a look at b and decide what method we would choose for this one. So take a second, look at it, and think about what method from the last page you would choose. Well, if you said the quadratic formula, I think that would be a good choice here because, factoring doesn't look like it's easily factorable. I'm not saying it's not factorable, but it's not easily factorable. Completing the square doesn't really work out. Graphing probably, who knows, maybe wouldn't get an exact answer. So can't really take the square root, so that means that quadratic formula would be the best. So what we're going to do, we're going to take the opposite of b, plus or minus the square root of b squared, 169, minus 4 times a times c that's going to be all over 2a, which is 2 times 2, which would be 4. Alright, so now I'll take care of what's inside of this radical sign. Just use a calculator to figure it out. Alright, so I've gone ahead and just done this inside work a little bit. So I'm going to wind up having 13 plus or minus square root of 361 all over 4. Alright, the square root of 361 is 19, so I'll have 13 plus or minus 19. Over 4. 13 plus 19 would give me 32 over 4, and 13 minus 19 would be negative 6 over 4. So my final answers here would be x equals 8 and x equals negative 3 over 2. And now you might be saying to yourself, well, why don't we just always just choose the quadratic formula? Because, if it works every time, no matter what. Well, C is a great example of that. I mean, B, look how much work it took to answer B. If I look at C, well, what's the best way to solve C? If you're thinking factoring, I would agree with you. What two numbers multiply to positive 12 and add to positive 8? Well, that is positive 6 and positive 2. Now remember, those are not the answers, those are the factors. And so the answers would be x equals negative 6 and x equals negative 2. So this obviously was much faster than if we solved using the quadratic formula. So if you can factor, I would highly suggest it. Alright, so for the next part, I'm going to have you guys try to do some on your own. So you'll have these 3. There's 4. So there's 4 of them there. I want you to take a look and see what method you would use, and in a second I'll have some things pop up. So if you want to pause the screen, do the work, and then when you resume, I'll have the answers all popped up there for you, and I'll tell you what method I chose. Alright, so let's go through our responses here. For number 13, I got x equals negative 12 and x equals 1. We factored them because they're easily factorable. You can easily look at it and say, well, two numbers that multiply to negative 12 and add to 11 are positive 12 and negative 1. So that was just an easy choice for that one. For 14, I could get ax squared equals t, so I did that, and then that way I could just solve by using square roots. So I got x squared equals 1, so x equals positive negative 1. For 15, looking at it, none of the other methods really fit, so quadratic formula was the best possible solution. So for that, I wound up breaking it down and getting 1 plus or minus 11 over 10. So my answer was 12 over 10 or negative 10 over 10. So I got 6 over 5 and negative 1 as my answers. And for 16, I chose to solve by completing the square. So I subtracted 2x from both sides. Then I took half of b and squared it and added to both sides. So I added 1 to both sides. And I got x minus 1 squared equals negative 4. Well, the square root of something can't be negative. So that's why that'll be no solution. And those are the reasons why I chose to solve by completing the square. So those are the problems you're going to have today. So there's going to be a few problems where you have to choose what method you want to use and then solve the quadratic equations. If you want to have a Google Meet, please let me know, and we can go over any of the things that you're having trouble with. All right, guys, have a great rest of your day. Let me know if you need any help.